Hi, I'm Steph,
I'm Maddie.
and this is another JBWS Facebook Live. I want to start off tonight with a little bit of a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about sexual abuse. This is a really sensitive subject, and so I just want everyone to be mindful that we're going to be talking about some sensitive content, but we will be linking resources and talking about those resources at the end. So that if you need support, please know that there's support available. So to start off, I just want to define a little bit what we mean when we're talking about sexual abuse. Sexual assault, I think most people think of what you see on TV, right? Like that stranger in the bushes that sexually assaults someone that's jogging. And certainly that's some of the case. Most of the time, it's someone that is connected, whether it's an acquaintance or an intimate partner. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Sexual abuse also encompasses certainly rape, but it also encompasses any unwanted advance or touch or lewd actions, right? So it's really a broad scope, and it's going to be based on the perspective of the person that's experiencing that. And so whether or not the person that commits that act, right? Let's say someone grabs my ass and they don't think that's an assault, and I think it is, then it's my perspective that matters. So that's just a really important definition when we're talking about sexual abuse. And another really kind of important concept when we think about sexual abuse is the idea of consent. And so Maddie's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about consent, we define it as a clear, concise, enthusiastic, and always reversible yes. Consent is giving permission and it's acknowledging that you feel safe and comfortable to do something with your own body with another individual. And this is so important when we are talking about sex in relationships, whether they're dating, committed, casual romantic relationships, in any kind of sexual engagement, that consent is needed. And just to highlight a few pieces of that definition: clear, concise, and enthusiastic. This has to be 100% that that's what another individual wants to do with their own body. And I think it's really important to also emphasize always reversible. That means that there's not just this ongoing consent. We can never assume that another person feels safe or feels comfortable or wants to do that with their body, even in a relationship. So we always have to check in with a partner, always making sure that this is something they want to do. And at any time, a person can change their mind about what they want to do. That's why I always emphasize that always reversible piece, because we're always in control of our own body. Steph is also going to link a video to this called T is Consent. And if you haven't seen that before, it's a really great video that breaks it down. And after you watch that, there are not many people who I can say feel confused about what consent is. It's a really great visual of just explaining how important this consent is in relationships. So I highly recommend everyone go check out that video if that isn't something that you have seen before. Something I also want to highlight today during this conversation is a little bit of teen impact. And this can also be applied to any relationship outside of that teen zone. But this is what I find in conversation highly impacts the adolescent age group. So something sexual coercion. So this is being forced, manipulated, or even the use of guilt to do something at a time you don't want to. We see this in teen relationships where maybe a partner is using that guilt. Perhaps you are in an argument with your partner and your partner is using this to say, well, if we don't have sex again, or if we don't engage in this, how am I supposed to know we're okay in our relationship now? How am I supposed to feel like we're here again and we're that level of connected? And maybe someone's not ready to do that with their own body at that time. And that's completely okay. It's always okay. So we definitely see that use of guilt. Another thing we see in adolescent relationships is this use of social status and peer pressure of maybe, well, everyone our age does. Why don't you feel comfortable doing this? All of our friends do, or your best friend does. Why isn't this something that you want to do? Why don't you feel comfortable with it? And that use of that social pressure, or thinking people my age are doing this. Why isn't this something I want to do? We can see a partner really using that manipulation and guilt in a relationship. And these were just a few examples that highlight what sexual coercion can be. Because like Steph said, I think a lot of us think of rape when we hear of sexual abuse, but it absolutely occurs within relationships as well, and these pieces of sexual coercion.
Thanks, Maddie. That's so important to remember. And I think it's kind of all muddled together, right? And when you look at consent and your definition of it, that clear, enthusiastic consent, and then when you think about what someone is navigating when they're in an abusive relationship, and if I am fearful that my partner will abuse me, right? If I'm not allowed to have a boundary that says this is where I end and you begin, how can I say no and be safe? Right. And so it becomes a little bit murkier, right? It's harder to, and I'm not saying that someone that's being abused can't give clear, enthusiastic consent. They absolutely can and do, right? But not always. And I think that it can be hard to navigate that space because consent doesn't mean consent always. And survivors, whether they're teens or adults, anybody can feel that pressure to engage in that way with a partner, especially if it's already on the table. Um, and so that guilt piece, I think, is really important regardless. Another impact that you think about with sexual abuse within the context of an abusive relationship is that not only is there that murky consent, but oftentimes someone that's abusive wants to use sex as a way to feel connected to their partner again. So it might be right after an abusive incident, right? And so that's certainly not when I'm going to feel like being sexually active with someone is right after they've abused me. You may have it physical abuse mixed in with the sexual abuse. There may be certain acts that are forced as a part of that abuse. And it really is something that can be hard for survivors to talk about and is really private, and something that as a society, I think we don't really talk about that much. As much as sex is all over the place, I think it still can be hard for people to share about sexual abuse and navigating that trauma. And I worked with survivors in long-term settings, and I've had survivors that like a year into knowing each other, they said, disclose that abuse. And said, I'm finally ready to talk about it, which I think just speaks to that really private nature. And even though there isn't a reason for someone to feel ashamed if they've had that experience, it's not normal as in it's okay. It's normal as in it happens, and that there isn't anything that someone did to deserve it, or isn't anything wrong with someone for feeling confused about sex with an intimate partner when there's abuse also involved in that relationship. And so all of that can be a real barrier to someone sharing what's happening for them, right? And so certainly, certainly there's a lot of benefit to talking about what's going on and sharing. And I think what I want survivors to know is that there is help out there. JBWS connects with survivors. Whether you want to talk about the sexual abuse piece or not, there's support. There's connectivity with other survivors that are experiencing the same. And, there's also, maybe you're listening to this and thinking, well, gosh, I'm in a really loving, amazing relationship, but I had, now that you've defined abuse for me, I realize that I maybe had that experience. We're really lucky here in Morris County because we also have Morris Cares, which is a agency that provides counseling for survivors of sexual abuse and assault any point throughout their life. And so I'm going to link both of that information for JBWS and for Morris Cares in the post in case anybody needs that information. But please know that it's not your fault, that you didn't do anything to deserve it, that it's not okay. And if you want to talk about it, you can. And if you don't want to talk about it, but you want some support, you can do that too. JBWS and Morris Cares are here. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but we know that these issues are impacting survivors all year round. And we hope that whether you or a loved one have been impacted by this issue, to know that you're not alone and that there are places that can help. So until next time, I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon.
Thanks for joining us.